for this game that we have here is kind of unfortunate. The result is beneficial for me, no doubt about it. I could have lost. Luckily it was just a draw. I'm not quite sure why my opponent decided on a draw. Maybe under the same false impressions as I was about how the game would have concluded. But we missed a few moves and the final position is definitely equal. And for something different, I also thought we would, or I should say, I would show you a game where I'm trying to play for the Nimzo Indian. But these days, people have gotten used to this idea, and it's difficult to get a advantageous position for it in the standard Queen C2, Nimzo Indian. As a result, I mean, I guess there's like Queen C2 and all kinds of modern setups like the Rubinstein, going for the doubling of the C-pawns. Either way, when they see E6 instead of more or less assuring black a solid and decent opening, you try for knight f3, inviting something like b6, the queen's Indian, developing a bishop on this diagonal, the light squid bishop on the a8, h1 diagonal, or the Boga Indian as I played in this game. For the bishop check, there's a lot of responses, knight bd2, knight c3, bishop d2. Typically if bishop d2 gets played, I have quite a few games where I play a5. Again, if exchange, restricting white's active development, which brings to mind precisely why maybe you play knight bd2, to not have to think about this anymore at all. And instead, we get a normal game. I think you are supposed to capture after a3, but there's two paths you can travel. One for the more classical Queen's Gambit, Catalan type situation. The bishop goes back to e7 or d6. e7 is probably the best move. Or you can exchange, keeping to the spirit of a Boga Indian. However, you claim your center is solid enough against the loss of the dark squared bishop, giving white the double bishop advantage. So you're going to play structure against dynamics of the bishop. d5. So far, this position looks exactly like you would expect from a Queen's Gambit, declined, except white for some reason has put his knight on d2. Either way, castles, a3, and this is the divergent path I'm talking about. Bishop e7 is what I mentioned, and there's so many moves you can play. It's really a whole system instead of just what's best. Bishop e7, bishop d3, c5, castles, knight c6. Looks like a very standard Queen's Gambit declined, where there's a lot of tension in the center, and white is a little passive because knight c3 hasn't been played and the bishop is stuck on c1 behind the e3 pawn. Therefore, black is not as restricted, I would say, in the standard Queen's Gambit declined. There's bishop a5, which is a total blunder. I don't know why it's so common, but after before knight bishop b6, c5, you just lose the bishop. Then there's bishop d6, which on the one hand looks enticing, I would imagine, but at the same time, except instead of losing the bishop because it gets trapped on these dark squares, something like c5, you have to move your bishop again after b4. Black is severely restricted on the queen side, and you can't easily dismantle your position. If c5 was played by black, this would be a different story. But this transformation of the structure, I can't see helping black at all. So between bishop d2 and bishop e7, those are my recommendations. I capture, don't think about it too much. Bishop takes d2, knight c6. I think I'm just trying to play in an irregular fashion. Instead of playing, let's say, c5 or c6 like a Slav, trying to have a very quick knight e7 if it was required to play c6, or to push e5 as I play in this game. A few ways as typical plans to attack it is b4, b5, weakening black's chance of pushing e5 with any of these major pieces, and of course something like bishop c3 and the queen. There's a very strong queenside play always for white in these types of setups, which you will actually see I made a mistake, didn't take it seriously enough, could have lost the game. Bishop d3, I just play passive move, just quick move. I think I was down on time, so trying to quickly make a move. Rook a8 follows the game plan more concretely, but white's response also just playing something like this, perhaps in anticipation of e5, but either way we're back to normal things. Normal would have been playing for e5 and the main line goes, these exchanges take place. I would play rook takes e5, after bishop c3, e, rook a8. I have played this before, and you get this exchange in the center, and black solid and is happy about the outcome, but white has a strong potential in these bishops. You are opening these lines from the center, and you have lost the center completely, while white has a very nice potential with a minority attack. So black has to be careful, which is one of the reasons why I don't like the e5 plan, but it works better. Instead of rook takes, you play knight e4. You're attacking the bishop, that's going to give you problems. But you see the evaluation is more or less the same. Bishop can capture, or obviously bishop can capture, or you just or you play around it. As you can see here, c takes d5, queen takes d5, and it's not so easy. Oops. And it's not going to be so easy from that position for black. There are quite a few moves, but the benefit would be the difference of opposite colored bishops, which allows you to defend on certain squares easier, and black, white, or the opponent with initiative can't exploit those squares. So in this case, the black bishop, the obscure bishop, is a bit weakened, but has potential. I mean, f4, g4, f5 type of ideas, and then e6 or f6 is dangerous, I think. I would be very hesitant to play this way. Maybe with plans associated, moving the bishop to this diagonal and claiming it's equal. But that's not how the game goes. My opponent plays the important move b4, And I immediately lash out with e5. And I played a game many years ago in a tournament where this setup was basically as bad as in this game, but my opponent did not play correctly, and we equalized. I equalized. D takes e4 is other move, perhaps a lot better, difficult to say. And knight, the bishop takes, and then you have an option. You move your knight, you move your pawn, you do something slow to prevent this advance. I'm not sure what to do here, because even in knight e4, this just does not look very appetizing. It doesn't feel practical. e5, there's b5, you lose the pawn, because you can't obviously counter-attack the bishop. Even if you could, let's say knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, black is losing, but instead you will just lose a piece. a6, bishop c3, you stop b5, but you want to play e5, and then white prevents it completely. No questions asked. D takes e5, my opponent just gives away the entire advantage. It feels like both of us maybe aren't experiencing a fighting spirit, or feeling empowered or inspired. But the exchanges happen. I played bishop e6, but you can obviously, of course, capture and then play bishop e6, you know, and it's just equal. Not such a good move. Counter-attack is something I looked at, but only the computer told me. And I thought, keep the piece on and maybe there's some kind of kingside activity. I was completely wrong. f4, and you can't exploit this. Now, of course, you can play like this, but why would white want to do that? You can go back as well, of course, but it's just equal, I guess. Black is solid enough. That's a nice pawn, I think, if you can keep to it. If the bishops disappear, some of these bishops disappear, then definitely black is not that worried anymore. King h2, and now again I think it's more or less equal, because white didn't push aggressively enough, and even here actually I have counterplay, but it's just equal. White has no initiative, black has no initiative, it's just equal, even though you're winning a pawn. This is an opposite squared bishop, approaching endgame at the very least, and both kings are solid, so you typically don't win these positions. That's one of the false impressions as well. Thinking that it's a middle game and there's more opportunities than there were. So I came up with a bit of a wrong game plan as the position progressed. You can see I'm trying to play aggressively. My opponent stops it in a very precise way, and I lose the pawn. I try to be aggressive, he defends nicely. I attack, you know, quickly moving the rook. But look at the pawn, there's nothing. f5, because I see I'm going to lose the pawn, right? But look what's happening here. And this queen can easily go to these squares, and I'm under attack. The whole thing I'm saying, this whole scheme, this whole thing, this whole event, this whole game, the game plan is to stop the activity of the two bishops. Now it's just one bishop, and I'm not stopping the activity. As such, I would say white has a slight initiative. Better would be to play rook a2, and then you have this line, but it's just equal, you know. But you have to defend your position, and this bishop is not doing anything. So after something like queen g4, the game would continue, but it's really just equal. These things like f6 or queen f8, I'm not sure what would be giving a better attempt. But these are the only targets. f4, you do not take it, of course, because something like this and it's game over. Look at the rook and then bam. So instead I just move my queen, and this is when I knew it was a draw if I play fine, and it looks innocuous. He attacks the weakness, you defend. He attacks, you defend. He blocks you. I'm not even sure it's possible to play queen d2, bishop bishop f1 or bishop e2 to f3. Takes too long. It's just equal. And you think it's just equal, and I'm losing. Again, not taking into account the weakening of the dark squares. Bishop g4, bishop d4, and the game is over. The game's finished. There's no move. King g8, and you can lose in a different way. Queen f6. I mean, this is never going to benefit black. Crazy. Opposite colored bishops, always possible to be attacked. False impressions, but my opponent very quickly took on f5 and it's just a draw. Now bishop d4 with these threats isn't important. You can play something like king g6, and there's nothing special, no special way to attack the king, and I'll play something like bishop f3 and then try to harass white's king. Yeah, possibly covering the square, trying to look into this kind of checking setup. Many false impressions that you can make, and in this case that's definitely a draw and there's nothing to do. White will not be able to attack these pawns with just the king, and my bishop will be able to defend everything, and I will never be able to attack these pawns. The bishop just comes here and there's no way forward, and I can't attack this pawn because the king will defend it. So I have nothing to attack with my bishop, I have nothing to attack with my king. He can't easily attack these pawns at the same time, so I'll just defend by moving my bishop. So the setup is actually too easy, and therefore it's a draw.